We're going to get started. Hi everybody. I'm Annelle Miller, the director of the Society of Illustrators. Thank you all for coming to this really wonderful evening. It gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce two people who are so very special, not only to the Society, but to me personally, who have helped me tremendously and who are always there when I need them, so thank you to both of you. Dilys Evans and Marcia Leonard. So take it away, ladies.
I'd like to give you a brief introduction of Dilys. She's really the star of this show. Oh, I have to hold it. Sorry. Dilys, as you will hear from her voice, was not born in the U.S. She was born in Wales. She knew right away that she was not going to stay a village girl. And so she became a nurse. Nursing was her ticket out, and it took her to the States. But she was always interested in painting. She was a painter herself, painter of landscapes. And for some time she traveled the world with painter Nell Blaine. And how long was that, Dilys? 10 years? 5 years? 2 months?
The trip was 2 years.
2 years.
Right. This is on. Is that better? That's better. The trip was about 2 years, yes.
And she ended up in the Vermont, New Hampshire area and became an assistant art director for then starting up magazine called Cricket. And so she was there in the early days, and that's where we met. I was an editor at Cricket. She had the sense to stay in the New England office. I was in the middle of the prairie in Illinois. The first telecommuting office, I think we had. Eventually, Dilys moved on. She came to the New York area and established Dilys Evans Fine Illustration. This was a wonderful agency. There weren't many children's book illustration agencies at the time, but she had a great eye for artists, and she had a wonderful portfolio. Among the people whose names you'll recognize: David Wiesner, Betsy Lewin, who's here tonight, Caldecott Honor Medalist, Troy Howell, Elise Primavera, Enrico Arno, Jim Arnosky, Pam Carroll, Patience Brewster, Faith Jakes, Chris Demers, Colin Bootman. Those are a number of the people that she represented. She is here tonight to talk about her work and her love of the fine art of children's book illustration. There's sort of 4 strands we're going to talk about. Her work as an agent, her work as the originator of this show, the Original Art Exhibition, which started in 1980. Her work as a consultant. She has been an advisor to many Caldecott committees, explaining to them what they should be looking for in a good children's book. And as the author of this marvelous book called Show and Tell, which has gotten rave reviews. And if you look at it and read it carefully, you will never look at a children's book in quite the same way. She really has explained how an artist should approach the book and what you take from it when you see it. So, that's my introduction.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if we really need to be holding these and doing this. You think we do? Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
If Betsy and Ted Lewin down there, also a silver medalist, Mr. Lewin, if they say so, I guess we better do it. Okay.
All right. So let's start with your work as an agent. When did you establish the company, and what did you look for when you were selecting artists for your portfolio?
Well, officially, in my mind, I started the company in 1978. By the time I got a card and I'd been around a few of the publishers, it was probably close to 79. But 1978 was really when I first started the business. And because of Cricket Magazine, every year we had an annual cricket picnic. And we invited all the illustrators, the art directors, the editors to come. And the younger ones stayed in the barn in sleeping bags. The rest of them stayed at the Lime Inn or various little places in Lyme, New Hampshire. And so I was meeting people like Walter Lorraine from Boston and John Keller from Little Brown. Walter Lorraine was Howard Mifflin. Anita Sylvie was there then. Barbara Lickie, I think, was at Four Winds, or Coward McCann Gahogan in those days. So there were a great many places to start. Holiday House used to come. And so when I came to start the business, I realized that I knew a lot of people already. So essentially, when I first went out in 78, 79, there were a lot of people that I knew, so it made it very easy. The hardest part that people said to me, must have been the hardest part, was going out and finding artists. Well, number one, I never went out to look for an artist. Number two, I never called one up. I certainly found them when they walked through the door, but because of cricket, I started with 8 people who were already associated with Cricket magazine, and when the word was out that I was officially leaving, they were calling me and saying, take me with you and please represent me. And a group of them, a handful of them I actually did, because I loved their work, I knew what they could do. But to answer the direct question from Marcia, I wasn't looking for good hands and feet and likenesses and great color. I was looking for one thing and one thing only, and that was imagination. Because you can learn all those other things, but if you don't have imagination, you don't really have anything extra special to say. And I built my portfolio around people who I felt had imagination. And I'm sitting here looking at Betsy Lewin in the audience and thinking of Blue-Footed Booby. Betsy's most well known for Click Clack Moo, Cows That Type, and Giggle Giggle Quack, and Duck for President, and things like that. But her style is very slapstick and funny, very sophisticated. And when she said she wanted to do a book about the Blue-Footed Booby, which has this wonderful dance, the mating dance, where they dance, they make these noises, they put their wings back, they hold their beautiful feet in the air, I thought, perfect. So off she goes, and Ted also, to the Galapagos, and they make pictures of, or rather Betsy makes pictures of blue-footed boobies. She comes back and she calls me and she says, okay, this is going to be different. I just looked at the photographs and they're so funny. They're better just left as they are. So in actual fact, the blue-footed booby ended up being a realistic kind of story of the blue-footed booby, but it is so seriously funny because they have these expressions, and meanwhile they're holding up a blue foot and saying, did you ever see anything more beautiful? I mean, it's so perfectly gauged. And she had the imagination to realize that by using them in a more realistic fashion and not just slapstick, that it would work better, and indeed it did. So that's the kind of thing that when I talk to students, I always try and find out if what makes them tick, what do they like to do best, and when they're excited and talking to me in a certain way, I know they're seeing it and imagining it. So that's one of the really major things for me to look for.
When you look at a portfolio, then you're looking for what do you put into a portfolio that you carry around? What kinds of things are you looking for? Would you look for from an artist?
That's a really good question, because I'm immediately thinking about 32 pages, and I'm thinking of an artist's ability to maintain a character throughout. They look the same, their gestures are the same. If Johnny runs in and opens the fridge, his head comes up to the handle of the fridge. When he comes back on page 10, if his head is above that, Johnny didn't grow a foot in 5 minutes. So consistency of character, the ability to create a sense of place, and looking around the show, I haven't had a lot of time to do it because I've been really, really busy in the city, but there's one little picture of a little bunny rabbit in a hollow, tiny little rectangle with a black frame, and it's got this little bunny rabbit settling down for the winter. And it's such a tiny little piece of art, but it has such a sense of place, security. There's almost a half smile on the little bunny's face before it goes to sleep. And the ability to paint that emotion is really very, very special. So I look for that ability. And I look for the ability to design a page, to move text from left to right. And when I showed a portfolio, I tried to have certain outstanding examples for each of my artists. And I'd have about 6 images for each one. Never more than that in the actual portfolio. But in the back of the portfolio, I had extra. So if they really wanted to see more of one artist, I could show it to them without them being overwhelmed too much. I wanted them to ask me for more. And then I knew I had some reaction. And also black line, love drawing, love that ability, a sense of humor. All the things that when we all think about picture books and what we love, we hope to find in those picture books. So I was on a hunt for that, and I had in the beginning, I guess in the 80s, I had one or two rather well-known illustrators who had won medals who were calling me and saying, you're terrific, I've seen this book or that book, I've heard about you, I want you to represent me, we could make a lot of money. And I remember saying, that's not exactly, yes, do I want to make a living? Yes. Would I like to make a lot of money? Yes. But I'm looking for artists who are finding their careers, are realizing their dreams, are really excited about what they're doing. I'm not in the business of taking a well-known person and continuing a different genre. And it was very early on for me. I'd been a couple of years in the business, and I sort of liked the idea of doing it my way and staying and building my business up that way. Nothing wrong with taking on a very successful illustrator. A lot of agents have done it, and it's been great. But for me personally, that wasn't who I was looking for. So that was a very singular point of view at that time for me.
When you are advising an artist, someone who shows a variety of styles, is that something that is a positive or is it a negative? Do you want someone who can show consistency in one style, or do you want someone who can take on different personalities?
Well, that's hard because a lot of artists can do that, anyway. And what I was trying to do was to find which was the best and well-realized skill they had, and the one they really enjoyed doing the most and did the best at. So that's a bit of a complex question, because a lot of artists are so talented they can do a great many different things. But what I would usually find, looking at a group of their work, is that one style would stand out, or they told the story better in one style than another. In the beginning, a lot of my artists kept alive and well, including David Wiesner, doing educational publishing. And there are pictures of the marching photon band still in some kind of Mifflin educational book that David Wiesner did. Because in those days, you still, I mean, in any day, you have to make a living. And so we did textbook work as well. So there were different styles that we used for that they were not using for their fine art and children's books, in terms of picture books.
It is a very different market. I can remember, I worked with Dilys for 1 year between my editorial work. And I can recall that it's very, very specific and not particularly imaginative. Draw 4 children here, one in a wheelchair, one with blonde hair, one who's African American, and is holding the book. It's very specific. And some of the artists can do that almost blindfolded and keep the heating oil.
Well, one artist said to me at one point, I don't want to do educational work. And I said, well, there's opportunity to make a living here. They pay very well. They pay quickly. And but I want to do children's books. I said, yes, don't we all? But we have to pay the rent, and we have to. And I finally got a particular story for this particular artist. And I only dealt with literature programs and poetry programs. I tried math for a while, and we had a few funny things that we did, but mostly it was literature and poetry. And this particular occasion, it was I can't remember which house it was, but I remember this illustrator saying, well, I want something very special and massive. And I said, how about the Battle of Agincourt? And they said, well, there you are. And I said, well, here it is. Here's a double-page spread. There's 4 lines of text on the right and 10 lines of text on the left. So all around that double-page spread, you can do the Battle of Agincourt. And it was one of the funniest things because this guy loved doing it, did a fantastic job, and fell in love with educational publishing. It wasn't always that fun. But the challenges were enormous because what they learned from educational publishing was that there were sometimes these kind of boring little stories that had there was a morality tale tucked in there somewhere, or a lesson. And they had to take a double-page spread with a 2-inch spot here. The action would go across the page. You'd have a little bit more on the right-hand side, maybe half a page, and you had to combine all that imagery around the text and make it work. So they learned about design and pagination, and it was often a good learning tool for picture book work. So it had its upside, and it paid well.
One of the things that Dilys started doing as her business built was to try and help people to see children's book illustration as fine art. This is something that, given what we see around us, we almost take for granted now, but back in 1980 it was kind of a radical idea. Most of the artists never came in contact with each other. They maybe met their editors or their art directors, and the art was rarely seen outside of their studios. So Dilys came up with this idea of having an exhibition of the original art, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, it all started in Cricket magazine, because before going to Cricket, I had been a fine artist, quote unquote, in New York. I was represented by the Green Mountain Gallery. I had a couple of one-woman shows, group shows. I was starving. I went back into nursing to make a living. And I found myself finally thinking, I've got to do something else to make this work that's creative. And when I had an opportunity to be an art director at Cricket, I realized that that was a whole other field and would be fun. I didn't realize that I'd be finding a whole other world. And because Trina Schottenheimer was the art director, every day she'd be working at her board at her books as well. And I started going into Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, and doing research on American children's books and illustration. And then I'd be seeing work coming in from various artists, and I started talking to Trina about, there's a fine art form here. I mean, some of this work is extraordinary. And because we were working with all kinds of wonderful illustrators. And I sort of started thinking about it as an interesting idea. And then one day I was reading a review about a 32-page picture book. And the review went on for a whole half a page, talking about all the wonderful stories, so well written. Then meanwhile, there's one line of text under each page, and it was very well written. But right at the very end, there was one sentence that described the artwork. And this is for a 32-page picture book. And this one sentence said, "Pretty little watercolors accompany the text." And Trina Schottenheimer was working over there at her drawing board. I was here, and I spun around, and I said, "This is outrageous, it's disgusting, this is an incredibly beautiful picture book." And I read it out to her, and she says, "Get used to it." And then goes back to her drawing, because no one was really taking it seriously as an art form. There were exhibitions of children's books at Christmas, or for a special occasion, or at the country club, or a little gallery maybe, but it wasn't being talked about even as a fine art form. So I said, when I go back to New York, because I was about ready to do that then, I'm going to start an annual exhibition celebrating the fine art of children's books. Now I knew that would be difficult, because getting into a gallery was difficult. I had no idea. But I wanted to do it because I had seen the fine art form myself. I'd seen all this work coming in for like 6 years, and I was looking through picture books. I was getting to know people by reputation, so I knew it was doable. And it took a little bit of hard work, but another agent at the time was Dick Morrill, who was very much involved with the Master Eagle Gallery in New York, a family of printers, because he did some special shows with them in terms of a special, I'm not sure if it was catalog things he was doing or magazines, but he had the connection. So he introduced me. And I met with Clarence Bayless, the director. We had a conversation. I met with the board, and they said, well, we could have a little Christmas show, but will anyone come? And then one of the board members said, well, children and parents will come. It's Christmas. We'll do a Christmas show. And I said, well, it could be before Christmas, because the same people are going to bring their children, you know. And I said to myself, this is going to be such a surprise for them, because there's a whole industry here who's going to turn up. They're going to want to see this work. And I said, you know, we might get 100 or so people here. He said, well, that would be very nice, but you know, that doesn't usually happen. Well, there were 2 galleries, and we had close to 400 people that very first opening night. They had people downstairs letting people in and out of the door, because we couldn't have that many in the building. And that was really a flag waving of what was to follow, because it's continued to be that exciting, or that excitable in terms of what it has to offer and people who come.
I think one of the interesting things is that the publishers had to be really encouraged to participate in that show. A lot of people, a lot of the art directors, everybody was overworked. They said, oh, you know, this is really too much for us to do. And Dilys got on the phone, and you don't say no to Dilys when she gets on the phone. And as I recall, you had one of your artists You drove around town. Will you tell that story?
Oh, yes. Tony Kramer, one of my young artists. I had a car in town, and we did a poster at the Maastricht Gallery. They did it and printed it and everything. And Tony Kramer drove, and I drove to every publishing house in Manhattan and hand-delivered 4 full-color posters to the exhibition and talked to everybody. Said, this is going to be so much fun. And we had a great time driving around Manhattan, and I certainly met everybody. And it was kind of, when we started off, the first half an hour was kind of, we were sort of anxious. And then we got to one house, and everybody was so happy. And then they called the next house we were going and said, you're going to get a special delivery. And it got to be kind of a lark. And I think that one particular year we made a lot of friends because we actually, quote, delivered after promising that it would be a show that people would come to. We had a lot of people coming to it. And, you know, a beautifully designed full-color poster. Present that to an editor or an art director, and they get convinced very quickly that it's real. And so that continued in tradition to be very popular.
It was a very funky place, let's put it honestly. It was a manufacturing company. You had to go upstairs in a freight elevator. The hors d'oeuvres were basically cheese whiz on crackers.
Something like that.
It's very, very different than what you see around you. And I think part of what Dilys has done with this show, and then the people who have followed after she has turned it over to the Society of Illustrators, is to give legitimacy, to show that this is really a wonderful, fine art. And I think that is a big part of what Dilys has done with the show. That first gallery exhibit also got a proclamation, didn't it?
Yes, a proclamation from the mayor's office. Unfortunately, they gave the proclamation to the Children's Book Council. They didn't realize that, but that was okay. It was still a proclamation for the exhibition itself, and we were very happy to see it. What I really wanted to do was then to be able to make sure that it continued. And when we left the Maastricht Gallery, because they were sold, and then they took down one gallery. And incidentally, I should mention the Maastricht Gallery had one of the galleries. The ceiling was designed by Leo and Diane Dillon, and it was a glass ceiling with light, and it was absolutely glorious. And I've always said that was an omen of things to come. And Diane Dillon is very much a part of this show. And for my Founders Award, she always is there for the jury, and she's the chair for that, and continues to be, and I always say thank you to her for that. But I think that was a good omen to start us off with. And then we came here, and I presented the idea to the committee here, to the board of directors. Diane Dillon was the one woman on the board, and one illustrator who did books for children. And eventually we did make our case clear that this was worthy of a place in the Society of Illustrators, and happily found a new home. And just, 18 months ago, the new director, Nell Miller, came in and really cleaned up the place in terms of painting the walls white, changing the lighting, doing a lot to revitalize all of the things that have been going on for a good almost 100 years, is it now? The Society of Illustrators? 107. So we feel now that we're part of the tradition, and that we're here to stay. And I'm very happy because I can come here and all the work's being done. And people are saying, oh, so nice to meet you, and I really haven't done anything anymore, and I say, nice to meet you too. But it's got a home, and it's very satisfying because one of the first shows that we had at the Maastricht Gallery, in fact, we always hung the shows for 9 years there. And I would call in different people to help, including half of my portfolio, and editors, art directors, people who are now heads of companies who are wielding a hammer and singing, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning. It was Joe Byers and Dylan and all those people, and we'd be all singing the songs and hammering nails into the wall. And things have changed, and so it's from that beginning. It's very nice to see that this will go on, and we don't have to hammer the nails in. Someone does it for all of the artists, and they deserve it. So it's a good story.
There's another difference too. The originals were all we asked was that they matte the art. They weren't even framed. So I think what you see here is so beautiful in its presentation. I think other places have gone on to exhibit as well. I'm thinking of the Eric Carle Museum.
Yes, in the last 10 years, there have probably been 3 or 4 new institutions that are now talking about the fine art of children's book illustration. And one of the most memorable is the Eric Collin Museum in Massachusetts, right? Amherst, yes. Terrific collection, they do wonderful things. There's also the National Council in Abilene, Texas, that has a terrific gallery and museum, and they continue to do wonderful things. And every picture tells a story. A rather large gallery out in Los Angeles, San Diego area. Storyopolis, yeah. I mean, we're now seeing more and more, and I'm very happy because people realize that yes, there is a fine art form to children's books, and one of the reasons that I wrote the book that I've written called Show and Tell, exploring the fine art of children's books, was to continue people's attention to the fact that this is a fine art form, and that I wanted language to be available to reviewers especially, and to librarians who talk about children's books, that they could use in terms of describing the art and a picture book and the way it moves from left to right, and the importance of design and color and line. So there'd also be a language now to use when talking about the fine art of children's books. So this was for me the next step, and I'm so happy the book is done and printed.
Well, why don't we talk about a little bit your work as a consultant and lecturer that really led to this book and is going to lead to your next book. Dilys had put together a wonderful set of principles, and these are guidelines for how to look at a children's book, but they could also be guidelines for how to create a children's book. It's things to keep in mind when you are working in this wonderful field.
Yes, the idea of this book was to choose 12 totally different artists with different points of view, different styles, different techniques, so I could use all of their vocabulary in a very conversational way that would be easy for librarians and reviewers and kids themselves who love picture books, teachers. I mean, it's across the board, and it would be fun and entertaining, not just a dry thing about this is what a composition means, this is what, so that it's very much conversational and fun. And then with the Caldecott Committee asking me to advise them so many different times, I've probably done it 7 or 8 times. The last time I did it, I put together a program, and it was called 10 Principles for Illustrating a Great Picture Book. And out of that, I'm probably going to be doing a book with something to do with that for my next book, for Chronicle Books. And it's something that's, for me, so simple, but somehow people can't just do the simple things. They have to try and do other things, and by doing other things that they think are very new and different, they forget the key principles and they lose the whole idea of show and tell and presentation of a story. So for me, that next step was that I wasn't thinking of doing another book until it came up this week with my editor as a possibility. But that suddenly occurred to me as being the next viable thing, and that's probably, I'll do something like that.
So can we go down the principles, and you can give me a brief, if I tell you what they are?
If you tell me what they are.
Okay. I remind you. In the beginning was the Word.
Oh, you mean you really are? Oh, I see. Well,
this is the brief version.
This is, yes, please. In the 80s, I remember when Barbara Cooney won a gold medal, and it was I think in Dallas or Chicago. I always went to ALA winter and summer. And Barbara Cooney was this wonderful 5-foot snowy white-haired woman. I think it was Miss Rumphius, was one of my favorite books that she did. And she's standing on the podium. She can barely get her chin above it, and her little finger goes up and says, "In the beginning was the Word, and I would like to thank the author." And I always thought, of course that's so obvious, but that's the biggest responsibility in the beginning. When I would get a manuscript from an editor or an art director and they say, "This is perfect for so-and-so or so-and-so," I'd say, "Okay, send it to me, I'll read it." And so I would read it, and then I would send it to so-and-so. And never failing, so-and-so would call me up and say, "Well, what do you think?" And I say, I don't tell you what I think first. You tell me what you think first, then I tell you what I think first. And the whole point was that they should absolutely love that manuscript. And in the beginning of the wood, it's a huge responsibility because it's the author's story. They worked and slaved and cared as much as any illustrator about this book, because it's half their book. And they've created the story, and it's the responsibility of the illustrator to take that story and not just illustrate it, but to absolutely love it, be excited by it, or challenged. I like my illustrators to say to me on the phone, "Oh, I can't wait to do this story, I love it." When Betsy Lewin got Click Clack Moo, How's the Type, she picked up the phone and she said, "I've seen the pictures already, I've done half the book." Do you remember that? It's a long time ago, but that's the kind of excitement that you want to hear from an illustrator, where you know there's a marriage of art and text. And so that was the very first beginning major principle for me, that you must be true to the story, you must tell the story, and then all the other things in doing that happen.
Number 2, preparation is paramount. Know your characters.
Yes, very, very important that if you're going to do, for example, when Brian Selznick did, when Eleanor and Amelia went for a ride, he got this story from his uncle who lived in Washington and told him the story about Amelia Earhart being invited to the White House for dinner by the Roosevelts. And in the middle of dinner, Eleanor Roosevelt turns to Amelia and says, "I can't imagine what it must be like to fly at night among the stars." And Amelia gets up and says, "I'll show you." And all the Secret Service men pushed them both back down to their seats and said no. And they both stood up again, and then they marched out. Eleanor Roosevelt putting on her elegant coat with a fur lining and her hat, and Amelia Earhart jumping into her 2-seat roadster, tearing off the Washington streets with the Secret Service behind them, and actually, in fact, did go into the plane, and one Secret Serviceman tucked behind the back seat while they took off and went into the air. And at that moment, as they're circling Washington, and Eleanor Roosevelt is saying, "It's magic," Amelia cuts the lights and cuts the engine, and the plane just drifts. The Secret Serviceman has a heart attack. Eleanor Roosevelt's in heaven, and so is Amelia Earhart, and of course they land safely. But that then became, that story was so fascinating to Brian Selznick that he spent 6 months in Washington doing research. He researched her wardrobe, Eleanor Roosevelt's wardrobe. He researched the White House. He researched the area, the plane, everything to get it absolutely right. And so that's a very, very important part of the story.
And you fall in love with the characters that way as a reader too. If you feel them and hear their voices and see what they do on the page. A great cover makes a great book.
Oh, that's a good story. I was telling Marcia earlier, I was putting little pieces of paper in here for things that might come up that I want to talk about. And when I came to this cover by David Wiesner for a recent book called Flotsam, it reminded me of a teaching session I did at Pratt, oh God, years ago. And it was going rather well, except there was one young man who kept interrupting, and he knew everything. He had long hair and jeans, and he was chewing all the time, and everybody was saying, "Oh, quiet," to him, and they all knew him. And he kept saying, then we'd be talking about something, he'd raise his hand, and he'd say something sort of silly, and I'd say, "Well, that's boring," and we'd do something else. Finally, we're talking about jacket art, and he says, I said, "Now what's a really compelling jacket to you? What would you think about?" This kid stands up and says, "I would do a rectangle, I'd paint it red, I'd put a bullseye in the middle, and I'd put the title." And I said, "Jeffrey, sit down." It's one of those moments. Well, we're like 28 years later, and David Wiesner for Flotsam does a red rectangle with a bullseye in the middle and the title on the top. Now it's a fish, it's obviously a fish, but I looked at that for about 2 minutes and I thought, Jeffrey was his name, or Jennings or something, and I wondered what this kid was doing now, because he has to be 30 or something. And I looked at that and thought, no wonder it really does catch attention. I mean, we all know it, but it was one of those serendipity things sometimes that happens and makes you smile. But anyway, that was the story.
But the wonderful thing that he couldn't have envisioned was that what's in the circle.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. I love editors because they remind you to mention the important parts. The important story, of course, is that there's this underwater camera that's the reason for Flotsam, the book. It's that a young boy finds this camera and develops the film, and it's entirely under the ocean. Only they're mechanical fish. And it like stops you when you see the boy looking at the first film. And so in the, there's this giant fish on the cover with small fish swimming alongside it. But in that bullseye, which is the fish's eye, is a reflection of the camera, which is where it all began. So it's a perfect cover. Thank you, Marcia.
And I also recall you telling me that the cover is the way you sell the story. It's your first touch point.
It is. Well, there are several things the cover must do. First of all, it has to catch your attention. I have friends who in the advertising business who say, you've got 10 seconds, something bright red and square with a circle, you're going to see it. But basically, if you're looking in a bookstore window, there are myriads of books that all around you. You need a cover that somehow your eye stops and you see something that catches your eye. And it's either a color, a shape, beautifully designed text, maybe totally white with just two black lines and just the title and a spot of color. But something that's so special that grabs you. And in children's books, we have to have imagery, so we nearly always have a full color picture on the front. But the design is very important, and spending time on that and making sure that it is, quote, eye-catching is extremely important, and that it says something that gives you a hint about what the book is about. Well, obviously, this is about fish and underwater, and it's all there on the front cover. It tells you what it's about right on the front cover.
Number 4, set the scene and sense of place before the story begins.
Yes, you start off with the jacket, so you've got a hint about what it's about. When you turn the page, you've got flap copy on either side. You have space there to start the story. You can put a picture of a part of maybe just a small boy, or maybe a cat or a dog, something that's some element of the story. So something catches your eye and you say, oh, look, you see this image. And then when you turn the page and you get to the title page, there should be something on the title page that catches your attention and starts you moving towards the story, so that you're already, the design and the pagination of it is getting you towards doing that. And there's a perfect example in here of that by David Shannon, one of his pirate books. Here it is, coming up, where he's done a title page that has the title of the book, and it has this young pirate running into the rest of the story, so you have to follow. And if you look at that, it's the title of the book, and this young boy, his sword is going across the page, he's on his way into the book, and it's going left to right, so you have to turn the page and start the story. But that's a wonderful example of catching the reader's interest immediately, and have you tear off into the book, and he's going from left to right.
Medium is the message.
Yeah, there are so many different ways of illustrating a book, and every so often I'd have an illustrator call me and say, I think I'm going to do so-and-so instead of so-and-so, and I'd say, they'd say, I think. If they said, I think, I'd say, well, why don't you do a page and see what you think? And very often they would do that and then change their mind. If an illustrator said, I'm so excited, I'm going to do collage for this book. I knew they were so excited they were going to do collage for this book. And I would say, fine. But if someone ever would say, I think I might just do, I would always sort of say, just be sure, maybe do something as a test to be sure that's what you want to do. Because the medium is so very important. And an example for someone like Brian Collier, when he did Freedom River, about the slaves in the Ohio River, he wanted to somehow make a theme of moving river striations, a kind of edgy thing of danger. So he decided cut, torn paper collage. And in the faces of some of the characters in the area, a woman standing right next to a double-page spread has these striations going across her face that are really the striations of the river moving, because for all of the slaves at that time, the river was their lifeline. It was the most important thing, so that theme runs throughout the book, and very often you'll see the theme carried out with these striations. It keeps in mind the fact that the river is the important element in the book.
One of the things that's so wonderful about show and tell is that there are, in these 12 artists, a great variety of styles and formats. It's a wonderful thing to see. And Dilys explains it very well, the kind of techniques that are used. Every picture must tell a story.
Yes, I mean, some of these things, you know, they're so obviously simple. They seem like, of course, you know, and yet when you're looking at the work of young illustrators just beginning, the excitement to tell a particular moment or whatever, in a hurry to get to that moment, not enough attention is paid on each moment of the story, because everything is a compelling part of the whole. So when I say every picture must tell a story, if it's a spot or a half page or whatever that image is, it must be giving something to the storyline, and it must be moving from left to right and be part of the whole.
Picture books are a form of dramatic art.
Well, that's interesting because I will be able to show various examples of moments in a picture book that's very dramatic. And when you start looking at a picture book, whatever the story is, there's always maybe the word dramatic is a bit strong, but in the funny picture books, there's always a moment that's screamingly funny, and that's the funny drama part of it. And so that you have to be aware that whatever story you're doing, you have to be very careful of the emotions, the time, exactly what's happening, and to be able to get that sense of feeling into that picture. So often I've seen picture books where the high points, the highlights, the fun part, they're emphasized very well. And the other pictures sort of take you to those places, but they don't say enough along the way. What I'm saying is that every single page has to say something along the way.
End papers are an opportunity.
Well, that's a really good example in this case. The designer of this book was Sarah Gillingham at Chronicle Books, and the end papers here are simply to use the covers of all of the books that I write about. And Sarah Gillingham, of course, said to me, naturally you'll want to help design the book and so on. And I said, no, naturally I won't, because you are the art director. I think your work is terrific. Why don't you share your ideas? And, you know, I'll probably love everything. And I loved everything. I had nothing to do with the design. And she did a phenomenal job. But in the end papers, there's a huge opportunity either to get into the book or to have a memory to take with you at the end of the book. And they should be considered wonderful places to use for both of those reasons. So think very seriously when you're working on a picture book that you've still got 4 white pages that you can use to good effect. And so do keep that in mind.
Art and type, the perfect marriage.
First of all, you need a typeface you can read. You need a typeface that's exactly the right point size for the age of the child who's going to be reading it. Sometimes designers get very fussy and cute and say, well, this is kind of a cute text, sort of like the little cute animals, and you don't want to hear that. If it's cute or whatever this picture idea is, you've done that already. You just want a wonderful, readable, elegant text to go along with the story. And so I'm always very anxious to see F&Gs and to see exactly what the typeface looks like once we started actually having books published and having our illustrators get a lot of picture book work in-house in our house, we realized that we didn't have to worry so much about the typeface anymore because we had created a certain standard, and we were given great consideration and choices, and we didn't have anything to do with the typeface anymore. We knew it would be okay. But I still wanted to see the F&Gs and make sure. So really you want a basically good readable typeface. You don't need any of the fancy stuff that sometimes are suggested by the design.
Save that for the display type.
Save that, yes, the display type.
White space rules. This is number 10.
Yes, white space, like the color white itself, can be both positive or negative. And depending on whether you have a really full page of imagery, or whether you have a simple line drawing, or just a couple of figures on a page with white space around, look at that white space and see how you can best use it. Use it to present the picture. Use it as a positive. or if necessary, use it as a diminutive space going back. I mean, it's a form, and you're making a form by the outline of the characters themselves, leaving behind that white space. Well, sometimes that form could be a triangle going off to the right and totally spoil your composition. Keep it in mind that if it's a big area of white space, it too is a color, and it has a place in that whole picture. So be very cautious and use it well, because it is a wonderful tool.
So that's the wrap up of the 10 principles. A lot of that is distilled into this book. As I said, it's totally marvelous. It's 12 different artists: Hilary Knight, Trina Sharp-Hyman, Harry Bliss, David Shannon, Brian Collier, Paul Zielinski, Petra Mathers, Ryan Selznick, David Wiesner, Betsy Lewin, Denise Fleming, and Lane Smith. It's a wonderful cross-section of artists. And if Dilys, you could talk a little bit about how did you choose these artists, or was that a difficult procedure?
Once I decided that I wanted to do the book, I already had probably 4 or 5 artists in mind, because I knew they worked so well, and I knew the books that would so fit into what I wanted to say. And the 2 obvious choices were David Wiesner and Betsy Lewin. And I knew exactly how to use their wonderful imagery in helping me describe the very best of fine art children's books. So that was a beginning. And then I looked at other illustrators whose work I knew very well, and who came from different points of view, totally different points of view, and used different mediums a lot. So I was looking for voices that could tell the story in many different ways. Denise Fleming, who's very interesting, she makes the paper, she makes the color, and she makes the art. And I wanted the ability to talk about her work in collage in a very different way. And she did a book where once there was a wood, and it was a true story about her neighborhood where this wood was being challenged by a condominium group, and they marched and protested against it and eventually lost. And so she did a book called Where Once There Was a Wood, and she handmade the paper. She went into the wood as they were bulldozing. She got grasses, seeds, all kinds of things. She impregnated all of her papers with the seeds from the wood, and all of the pieces of stems and leaves. And then as she did the book from left to right, as the story continues, the white space, you see the little white space on here, the white space slowly grows across the page till there's no more wood, and it's over. Saving our woods and our wilderness, it became a great element for showing how the story starts and ends, a finality to it. And it was brilliant, and it was a great, for me I loved putting it in for all of those reasons above, because it suited a cause. And trying to think of another one. And then one young illustrator, I was in a bookstore looking at books, and I found this book called Uptown by Brian Collier. It was his first picture book. I didn't know who he was. I knew that Laura Gardner was the editor at the house, and I picked up the phone and I said, "Laura, it's Dilys. Who's this young man? I just found this book in a bookstore. It's great." And she said, "Oh, Brian, he's wonderful. It's his first book." And I said, "Well, I'd like to talk to him. Where does he live?" And she said, "He lives in Harlem. Here's his number." So I called him, and the next day I got on the train to Harlem, and at 198th Street or something, I got off. I found his studio, and he looks like a huge football back. He's huge, and he's got this gentle, sweet smile and voice. And we talked for like 4 hours. We talked about fine art and the fine art of illustration. And I saw some of his things he was doing for other books, possibilities. And I told him I'd like to write about him and put him in my book, and he was delighted. And then I started work, and C-Star, who was the first publisher, was suddenly up for grabs, up for sale, and the whole company was on hold. And it took almost a year and a half before Chronicle Books San Francisco bought C-Star, and then they were choosing which manuscripts they wanted, and I got a call saying they loved my book, they wanted to do it. So I got back on finishing the book up. By the time the book was published, this young unknown Brian Collier had won the first Ezra Jack Keats Award for Best Young New Black Illustrator Coretta Scott King Award and a silver medal, Caldecott silver medal. I mean, he really had made it by that time, and so that to me was a very happy story, because when I first saw him, you know sometimes when you see something how talented someone is, and I saw his preparatory sketches of ideas for a lot of other things, and they all came true, so that was a very easy choice, but not one I planned on.
As you started assembling the chapters and working on them, what was your process? How did you go about creating each of these chapters? Did you do interviews? Did you study all their books? Was it a sort of multi-directional approach?
Once I decided the 12 people I wanted, I knew the first thing I had to do was to talk to each one and tell them what I was doing and find out if they'd be interested and if I could use their work. And absolutely everybody was agreeable. It was wonderful. So I got everybody I wanted in the book. They all said yes. And so that made my life very easy. And I did all the interviews, as many as I could in person. I think I only did about 4 on the telephone when we couldn't get together. And they were all between about 4 hours. The 2 artists I represented, I didn't have to do 4-hour interviews, but we talked on the phone a lot. And so it simply went that way.
And then did you have a collection of their books, and in selecting the pictures, was that something that was obvious to you? Which pictures you had to have in the book? I mean, obviously when you do Hilary Knight, you have to have Eloise, but some of the others might not have been the most obvious choices.
Yes, and sometimes I surprised myself, and sometimes I looked at a lot of books and found images that occasionally I'd say, oh, I've got to include that. I was trying to get a whole picture for each artist and find things that best represented them and things that they also loved. And also to show things like, there's a piece in Giggle Giggle Quack. No, actually it was Click Clack Moo, Cows That Type, where there was a moment where Farmer Brown is being told by everyone in the barn that the barn is closed. No milk, no eggs, nothing, because he won't give them electric blankets for them to have at night because it's cold in the barn. And so the illustration here needed to show Farmer Brown standing in front of the barn reading a note that says, closed, no milk today. And he has to go crazy because he's furious. Now, how can you show the note in big enough type and Farmer Brown's back reading it and his face being angry and maybe some animals looking on? What angle do you do for that? And what Betsy Lewin decided to do was, you don't see the real Farmer Brown at all. You see this bright red barn door, which suggests danger already, and it's got the sign on it. And right against the barn door is this enormous shadow of Farmer Brown jumping up in the air and screaming with his arms and legs going. And that shadow imposed on the barn itself is really funny, because he's twice as big as he would have been if he was actually drawn into the picture, and it works beautifully. And
yes. It's a little hard to see, but you can get the...
And the cows are sort of looking on here, but there's this huge shadow of Farmer Brown. And it's one of those genius solutions by an illustrator on how to solve a very difficult problem, because you've got this line of text, and you've got to read the note, see his face, see what's he... I mean, it's a huge test, and I think that was the perfect solution to that moment. And one other thing with David Shannon, which I love. I think I'm being toasted. His No David series by David Shannon, there's one moment where there's a double-page spread, and it says, not in the house, David. And the small boy, David, is in the house. He's got his baseball hat on, and he's got his baseball bat, and he's about to take a swing. Now, the suggestion of the red in the picture says danger, and he could have done it with him having hit the ball and everything smashed and it's chaos. But it was far better not to do that, but to do it the moment before, where every kid looks at that and says, wow, look what's going to happen, the bat's going to swing and this is going to go, and they tell the story and they see the picture. Now that was a deliberate choice by David Shannon to create the situation where the viewer helps finish the story visually. And it's exciting for them to do that. So that's another kind of approach to how to illustrate something.
I think at this point, we should see if there are questions from the audience. If there are people who have any questions for Dilys?
Yes.
Yes. I have a friend who is an art director at Viking Penguin.
You're about to get on.
Oh, thanks. I have a friend that's an art director at Viking Penguin, and I was asking her what the world is like for children's books, and because I was thinking about getting back into it. I used to do it, and now I'm thinking about getting back into it, so that's why I'm here tonight. And she told me some sort of disheartening things. One of them is that parents don't read to kids anymore, and they're in front of the computer. So I was curious about that. And the other thing I want to know about is, what's the story with the digital art? I'm coming back after, many years of not doing, that kind of illustration. I certainly don't know, don't even know a Mac, and direction as to, can I still do what I used to do?
The first answer to the first question about, I think which way to do this. It's true that some parents don't read to their children anymore. We're all concerned about how smart our kids are when at 2 and 3 they can be on a computer and make it work. The National Council of Teachers of English has a conference, or 2 conferences a year, I believe. This year they're in Abilene, Texas. There'll be about 10,000 of them. And 2 of the professors came to the launch of my book in Philadelphia and invited me to come speak to them, because their conference this year is visual literacy. And it's huge, because they too are concerned about the fact that kids are so captured by computers, and they should be. I mean, it's a magical thing, and they're so smart and dexterous that they can hit a button, and then they're challenged, they hit another button, and then there's a story. And so the challenge here is for parents to, yes, of course, the kids are going to learn the computer, but to hold off a little bit longer, so that instead they go outside, pick up a stick, and they're Robin Hood. We want them to find their imagination and exercise it. We want them to understand that they make the stories by interaction. At dinner with Scholastic the other night, one of the editors was saying she came home on a Saturday afternoon. Her teenage daughter was on the computer, and she said, "It's a beautiful day, why aren't you outside?" And she said, "Oh, well, I'm talking to my friends." And she said, "I'm talking to Susie and Betsy." And so this editor says, "Susie lives across the street and Betsy's around the corner. Why don't you just get together?" And she said, "Oh, no, this is fine." No, that's not who we all were, most of us. We'd much rather get out of the house and go be with our friends. So it's something that's it's where we are right now. It's who we are right now, the new generation. And I must admit, I have a cell phone, I have a palm, I have a computer, and I couldn't really survive without them. I'm always a little nervous with my computer, because sometimes with my arthritic finger, it'll slip down in between, and I'll get this ridiculous default question on the screen, and I pick up the phone and shout for help, because I have no idea what it means. But I couldn't do without it.
Has it affected the market?
Has it affected the market? Let's just finish this idea. So it's there to stay, and we're all of us in our business, and teachers certainly, and parents who are educated in terms of knowing how important imagination and play is, and also the overweight kids. There's that whole other point of view coming about getting kids out and playing. That's being addressed digitally. We had a dilemma here in the society the first time we started getting fully digitalized artwork. Where was the original art? And what are we going to do? I said, we're going to embrace it and find out how to do it, and it's magical. And now we see a lot of Leigh Smith uses digital and all kinds of regular art form mixed together with it. And it's working it out. It's finding its way in its place. Should I encourage you to get back into the business or not? There will always be watercolor. There will always be gouache and pen and ink and collage. And you do it your way, the way you want to. And if you can't do that, then maybe there's another way of getting into something in an aligned way in the profession. But there's nothing to stop you from doing it, because look around these walls. There's not that much digital when you look at 261 pieces of art. 261? 125. I'm terrible with numbers.
There were 600 entered.
But at least I know there were 600 that came. Okay. Yeah. I knew to ask. Yes. Uh-oh.
Dilys, I just wanted to address this notion of children not reading or parents not reading to their children.
Great. Thank you, Betsy Lewin.
I was at the National Book Fair in D.C. this year, last September, last month, and there were 120,000 people attending that book fair, which takes place on the mall. And there were 70 authors and illustrators, everywhere from adult authors to young adult authors to picture book authors and illustrators, doing presentations and signing their books there. And I thought it was very heartening to see that many people. I mean, it looks to me like reading is alive and well in this country, and being a picture book author illustrator myself, I couldn't believe the number of parents who came to have 5 and 6 books autographed. And while they're having their children's books autographed, they're videoing it. And then they want their children's pictures taken, with the authors and illustrators. I'm sure that, there are figures on the number of people in this country, the percentage of children who read or the parents who read to their children. But I think it's still alive and well. I think it may be in a little slump now because of the introduction of all this new technology. I think it's going to hang around. I really do. Grandparents seem to love to sit and read to children. So if I were you, I would still consider getting back into the field.
Thank you, Betsy. That's great, because that's a very important event every year. Those are huge numbers. It's fantastic.
I'm going to be brief. I'm a children's librarian, and I was at the University of Arts when the book arts first became a master's program. One of the things I just wanted to say tonight is how excited I am that you highlight Click, Clack, Moo, because as a children's librarian, I was so excited to have something humorous and that the parents weren't bored out of their minds, because sometimes you sit in the children's library and you're trying to inspire everybody to get into the artwork and the story. But when Click, Clack, Moo, it was incredible how many times I was like, oh, it's the middle of January, we've got to do this story because everybody needs a pick-me-up, But, that's all I really wanted to say, was as a children's librarian and an artist, I understand that what the work is going on here is very, very important. And fine art is extremely important for the kids to understand. And if we can continue to do that, I certainly do that with the kids guessing how the artwork was made in the stories, and just to get them interested. Because I think for a while there, librarians wanted children to behave to hear a story. And sometimes they can't behave. They want to get up. They want to,
That's part of it. No, David.
Right. That's why it's so refreshing to see some things that can change the viewing.
Well, and that was actually the fact that David was such a little monkey growing up. This was actually true. He did his first drawing at age 5, a little pencil scribble, which is reproduced in the book, of this little boy, and it says, in his pencil, it says, "No David" on it. And before he did his first children's book, he was doing magazine covers and book jackets, all kinds of things. And what made him famous? The idea, "No David." This young boy whose mother was always saying, "No David." And of course, at the end of one of the books, it says, "Yes, I love you." I mean, it's fine, but that kind of humor and that kind of storytelling, and that's exactly what we all need. And we love you because you're a librarian. Thank you.
Big Mouth here would like to just say one more thing.
I just would like to give a little credit to Doreen Cronin, too, who's my partner in crime and the author of The Farmer Brown and The Farm Critters. Doreen is a genius at injecting humor that also appeals to adults in her books, and I think that's one of the things that keeps them so alive. I've had parents tell me that they never get tired of reading those books because they laugh them so silly. In fact, we met at the National Book Fair a man who had just won either the Pulitzer or the Nobel Prize. I can't remember which, and Pulitzer. And he showed us a questionnaire that had been given him I guess when he was, I don't know whether he was applying, after he had won it. And one of the questions was, what is the latest book you read? And he said, Duck for President. And he gave me a copy of it. He came over to the table and gave me a copy.
He's been reading it all week.
He said he'd been reading it all week and he thinks it's supposed to be funny.
I think we should add Pulitzer to that jacket and we'll go back into print. No, it's a totally interesting thing. You had a question?
Well, I just wanted to say something. I'm not an artist and I'm not an illustrator, but I'm very interested in what you people do. And I have 6 grandchildren, and I'm called the Museum Grandma. And I just wanted to let you know that the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I'm sure the Whitney and the MoMA have similar things, have a marvelous children's program where you can come, I think it's Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they divide the children up according to age, and the activities are according to the age of the children. I took my granddaughter there, who's 7½, and first they took them to see, they sat about 30 children in a corner of the museum under some Jean Miro paintings, and asked each child to explain what they saw, volunteers, who saw what, did any of you see anything? They all saw something different. They all saw things that the adults were sitting there saying, where, what are you talking about? Where are they seeing these things? And then the teacher, instructor, whoever she was, distributed paper and crayons and some colored pencils, and had the children draw their own rendition of the various Miro paintings. And this is wonderful to keep them, we want another generation of artists and illustrators. We don't want them to just know how to work the computer.
Exactly.
And I have a question too.
Yes.
I wrote a 1-page children's story. And it's not exciting, it's not, challenging. It's just a very, I think, poignant little story. And I don't know whether I go look for an illustrator or go look for a publisher. I don't know what to do with it. It's just 1 page long, and I don't plan on becoming a children's book author after this. This is my one
I have
shot.
to tell you that so many people have written a children's book story. Just about every other person wants to. It's one of the most difficult things to do because simplicity and humor, and there's such a talent to learn how to do that. And I don't know if you've ever taken any writing courses or.
No, but I've written all my life in my jobs.
Oh, well, that's different. You're coming from a writing background.
Yeah.
It's very different. You're saying that.
Yeah, no, I do, but I've never done anything like this.
Well, the last thing you would do is look for an illustrator. First of all, you'd have to submit that poet manuscript to a publishing house for consideration, but not before you'd looked at books in print to see if it's already the subject matter has been covered. And also, you need 2 pages of explanation of where the idea came from, maybe, or something like that to accompany the manuscript. We should be doing this. This is the editor. What am I trying to do?
Many publishers do not accept, at this point, unsolicited manuscripts. They are only looking for manuscripts that come from an agent, that come from someone who has already published. There are still houses that will accept a manuscript, what they call over the transom, something that just comes in. Clarion Books, where I work, still does that because we feel this is a way to find new talent. The best thing to do is to go to cbcbooks.org. Children's Book Council maintains a website, cbcbooks.org. It maintains a website with all the addresses of the member publishers and all the requirements for submitting manuscripts. That's my recommendation. There is also information on their website for new illustrators, anyone who is interested in that aspect of the business. It's an organization of publishers, and so they do various programs. There are also many organizations, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, for example, has all sorts of training and seminars that you can take. They have conferences in New York, in various states. There are regional organizations. There's a big conference in New York and a big conference in California every year, and they can be very helpful. But it has to be honest, it has to be a passion for you, because getting into the business is very difficult. What we see right now is tough times, and so publishers are looking for someone who already has a reputation, or a manuscript they can pair with an artist that has a reputation. That's the publisher's job, is finding the right artist for the work. It's not something, although I have to say, in the audience is one exception to this story. One of the people I've published, Dan Salmieri, I always say this: never, never, never pair up with an artist if you're an author, with an author if you're an artist. But in his case, it worked. But this is something that the publisher does, that they find the right person. They have a stable of artists that they often work with. So they are looking to keep those people occupied, keep that person with them, with their publishing company. And so that's how that works.
Thank you very much. You've answered a lot for me.
There's just one thing I'd like to say about Doreen Cronin, who, as Betsy Lewin explained, is this incredibly talented author. She wrote a book called Diary of a Worm. Now, can you imagine being an illustrator and you get a manuscript and it's called Diary of a Worm? You're thinking, oh, you're looking at this and you're thinking, Diary of a Worm, and you start reading it and you realize it's very funny, and then you think, God, I'd love to do this, but it's a worm, and it's like, well, what would a worm look like, and how would I make a worm interesting? And what Harry Bliss did, who was the illustrator, he said, I asked myself a question. If I was a worm, how would I hold a pencil? And that's what I'm talking about, imagination, and how that kind of thing comes into it in a very big way. So he figured out how the worm would hold a pencil. And then the worm still looks a little weird, so baseball cap. Everybody wears a baseball, put a baseball cap on. So the baseball cap goes on, and where would he should be on the cover, because it's got to be on the cover. So he gives him a high-tech chair in the form of a Coke cap bottle, it's upside down on the ground. And his high-tech desk is a mushroom. And it's genius. And because the scale of the worm is small, it doesn't exaggerate it, the design decision was to make the text big. And this is a perfect example of having a very difficult situation with imagination and making it work. Now look at this. And you can't quite see it, but it is so compelling because it's not too tricky. Less is more. And there's nothing I hate more than overemphasizing the cuteness of an animal, the anthropomorphia that goes crazy with bug eyes and eyelashes and long-lived Beatrix Potter and that. And so I just wanted to show that because that's often a challenge, and you have to work that out before you say yes to the manuscript. Are we done? You've been a terrific audience, and Nell Miller is coming up.
I just want to say one other thing about the industry, and for those who maybe think that children, aren't being read to. This show draws more students and children than any of the other shows that we have. If you come to this gallery every day, right, Tom, for the next 6 weeks, there are students of all ages here, sitting on the floor, reading the books. We get more requests from teachers to come and visit this show, and it's very exciting. And when the children come in, especially the really little ones that are this high, they know these are their friends hanging on the walls, and they're pointing to them, and they know them. So it's encouraging to see that, and I think that it's important for everybody to know that there's lots and lots of kids that come here over the next 6 weeks. So it's a really good thing.
Yeah, I'm from the Zimmerly Art Museum in New Brunswick, New Jersey. We've had a gallery and a collection of original illustrations for children's books since 1979. And in fact, I think we've been involved with you in various ways. People that you named are in our collection, like Mathers, for example, and so on.
Right.
The exhibitions, the regular exhibitions, are visited regularly by families, by classes. We offer workshops where children learn to plan their own books, how to work with rough drafts, how to do dummy books, how to do storyboards mostly. I think the biggest trouble is to get children into the process, not to the finish point, but into how I think about something and then how I think about something to make it better. And that's so exciting once they start to do it. It's the only cure that I can think of for, I think I saw a product advertised where it was a so-called smart book, and you put some sort of little wand over it, and the book talked. And that's so revolting to me, frankly. Why do they think that our children are stupid? They're not, but we're trying to counteract that. I don't think that children truly want to be passive. That's not natural for them.
Yeah, and I think as bad as some of the news is in terms of the computer, the financial institutions, all of that, in some way it's a stimulus and it's a challenge for everyone to spend more time getting children to read books and to do. And so this might well be an impetus that's for the good as well. As for being complacent sometimes.
Really good.
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite pictures of my younger daughter is of her sitting in front of an electric typewriter, typing in the story. She would ask me letter by letter what letters to press to write the story that she had in mind. The technology did not get in her way. At that point, she could not make a letter. She would only get 2 letters on a page. But she could type and then read those little keys. It was great for her. The computer can be great for kids as long as what they're doing with it is not a passive activity.
Yeah, it's a matter of timing too when they first begin, because once they start, it's magic. I mean, I can understand that. So the challenge for all of us, I think, is to make sure that, if we have young kids, that of course they get on the computer, but not until they're maybe a year older than a lot of parents allow their kids to be on the computer. So they've got a little more time for their imagination and playtime. It's like seeing the 3 kids walking down the street, they're texting and they're texting each other. Yeah. And then one of them walked right into me and I said, "Yoo-hoo!" And she jumped a mile, So I'm so sorry. I said, "That's right. We were texting each other." And they said, "Oh yeah," and they walked on. I'm just going to check it. They weren't.
There's also something to be said about the act of reading to your child. You're the first educator to your child, and they're sitting on your lap, which is like so adorable.
It's so
and
much
you have
fun.
the book in front of you, and you're going through the words, and you have the picture, and you turn the next page. The act of reading. I mean, if we don't do that anymore. I mean, I know I'm speaking to the community, but it would be such a shame. I mean, a computer, you're doing it with a thing. There's no interaction. There's no explanation except for what the thing says back to you.
Yeah, I just remembered Barbara Lucas, who was head of Harper Brace Yovanovich in the 80s, started a publishing seminar at Vassar every summer, and it went on for 16 years. And I think I talked to about 12 or 14 of them, I don't remember. And this one particular year, this young woman was carrying this huge box thing, and we had to help her put it up on the desk, and we said, "What's that?" And she said, "It's a computer." And we said, "It's a what?" And it took 2 people literally to lift it on and to open up on the front of it, and somebody said, "Oh, it's a typewriter," and she said, "No, it's a computer." And she was very scientific and positive and rather, she had an attitude, and she sat down in front of it, and we all went over and over and over. And as years went on, we literally watched more appear. They got smaller, and we started having discussions about computers and whatever. And when I look back on that now, it seems an astoundingly short period of time. And actually it is, and when you think of what's happened so fast. So we're all playing catch up, and we've all been taken by surprise a little bit with computers and kids. And so that's why I think everyone now is turning your attention to trying to do something to make that better. So you've been a terrific group. Do we have time for one more? Yes.
It's not a question, it's just a comment on children's books. About 18 years ago when I came to this country, that was how I was learning the English language. I was reading to my daughter, and together with her and a dictionary right next to me, we were going through the pages. So,
Can you speak into the microphone?
yeah, can you hear me now? So what I was saying that when my daughter was little, I was reading children's books to her, and that's how I was learning English. I had to translate every word in the beginning, but on the third and fifth and 10th time, I remembered the words, and I got my vocabulary going. So there is also the other communities besides English-speaking communities who are heavily involved, and even if they don't understand the language, they do appreciate good art.
And I think that's really fascinating because of all the immigrant population who don't speak English who come. The illustrations are so important because they tell you the story and help find the words. And so it's great for kids. And I actually do have a friend who, his son was like a teenager, but really started to learn from picture books first because it was an easier way of figuring things out. And that's a really good point. Yeah. Wow. I need a martini.